Hi, it's Kristen and it's time for another Feminist Friday. So for this Feminist Friday I'm going to be reading Stone Blind by Natalie Haynes. This is Medusa's story in Greek mythology. I think a lot of people generally have heard of Medusa, the gorgon with snakes for hair. When she looks at people they turn to stone. That's I think what a lot of people know, but this is gonna like delve further into what happened. I think Medusa's often seen as a villain in like wider pop culture, seen as like a monster and a character in Greek mythology to be like scared of, but this is going to give a more nuanced take on the myth of Medusa, because actually when you go into it, like, she was very much taken advantage of by Poseidon and was punished by Athena, and so this is going to delve into that. I've never read any Natalie Haynes before. This is my first Natalie Haynes. My sister has read this. This is her beautiful signed limited edition. It's just stunning. It's so pretty. But my sister read this, she really enjoyed it. She said it's not just from Medusa's point of view, you also get the points of view of other figures in Greek myths, Athena, Hera, Andromeda, other female figures in Greek myth, and how all their stories sort of intertwine and like contribute towards Medusa's story. I'm really excited to get into this and to see if Natalie Haynes becomes like a new favourite. I've always wanted to read this, but I've bumped this up my TBR to like now, because I'm going to see Natalie Haynes talk at my local Waterstones. She's going to be promoting her new book, her newest book that came out I think end of last year, Divine Might, but it's just come out in paperback, so she's doing a tour talking about that book. But my sister hasn't read that book. She owns it but hasn't read it yet, so she said I could read the Natalie Haynes book she has read, which totally fair. So yeah, I'm going to delve into Stone Blind so I can say I've at least read something from Natalie Haynes before I go and see her. My mum said that she saw Natalie Haynes on Sunday brunch like end of last year, which is what spurred her to buy Divine Might for my sister for Christmas, and that Natalie Haynes was very interesting and was like interesting to hear talk. So yeah, I'm excited to delve into this one. I know there's a lot of discussion like generally online that I've seen, especially recently, about whether like all these Greek mythology retellings that say that they're feminist retellings, whether they like actually are genuinely feminist retellings or whether they're just retellings from like perspective of women, but when those women are still like torn down or like tragic figures in the stories, is that really a feminist retelling? Which I don't know, you might be watching this going, why is a tragic story about a female figure in a feminist Friday, like, is it actually feminist from a feminist perspective? That's a valid argument to make, but for the from my point of view for doing these feminist Fridays, I just want to focus on female authors, female characters, female stories, with a little more like nuance and looking at wider perspectives and things like that. So that is my intention with this Feminist Friday reading Stone Blind. So I'm about to start part 3 of Stone Blind. So far we've had Medusa backstory, obviously. of like how she came to be and her living with her sisters and growing up and stuff like that. We've had Athene backstory with where she came from, how she was like born, created, etc. And we've had in part 2 Perseus backstory of, you know, his mother and his conception and then his birth and growing up. So we've got like the backstories of the important players in the myth, and then we've had a few other chapters which have had perspectives from other people like Hera and Gaia and that kind of thing, to give it a little extra rounding out of the story, a bit more context, that kind of thing. Very helpfully in the beginning of the book there's like a rundown of the characters and like who they are, what they're the god or goddess of, or if they're immortal, and their like relation to the other gods, whether they're like the brother or the sister or the wife or the sister and wife, you know. I'm liking this because there are some characters in here that I'm familiar with the myth of, like how Athena was born and, you know, Medusa and that kind of stuff. And then there's other characters that I'm not familiar with, or I only know like a part of their story. Like obviously I know Perseus grown up and how he comes into Medusa's story, but we had Danae as a character, and I was intrigued by her and wondering like how she came into play, not personally realizing that she is Perseus's mother. So when she had a baby and I was like, who's this character, how does this all link up? And then it was like she called him Perseus. I was like, oh, okay. Maybe you knew that, but I have like a base knowledge of Greek mythology. I really enjoy the Greek mythology books I read, but I have like, yeah, I know certain myths better than others, or certain parts of myths or characters involved in myths better than others, or better than like a larger picture kind of thing. But I'm really enjoying this one so far. The chapters range between being like very short, like 1 to 2 pages, to being a little bit longer, but I think so far the longest chapter has only been around like 12 to 15 pages maybe. So I'm really liking the chapter lengths. You may know, if you've seen videos of mine before, I love a short chapter because I find it much easier to read, and like it motivates me to read more and keep reading. But yeah, I'm really enjoying this one. I'm like a third of the way through, I would say. And yeah, I'm on to part 3 now, which is called Blind. And yes, Medusa has just had the curse enacted upon her, so things are about to get intense. I say about to, it's been intense literally from the get-go. I'm on to part 5 now, which is called Stone. I think this is the last part, so I've read parts 3 and 4 since I last filmed. And they were just like filling me with dread, because obviously I know what's coming, what the sort of end of Medusa is and what goes down. And so reading all the bits around the other characters and like them preparing and what's going on in their stories is just setting up for this ultimate end for Medusa. And yeah, it was just filling me with like a really sad sense of like foreboding, and it just makes me sad. Medusa's such a
such a tragic character in like all the stuff she goes through, everything that happens to her, and she just has this awful ending. And it's only really her sisters here who actually care for her. Everyone else either like deliberately causes her pain, or they just don't really consider her. Like Perseus is just like, I need the head of a gorgon, and like doesn't think about the fact that that means killing someone that he doesn't know and who's never done anything to him, because he's just like, I need the head of a gorgon to stop my mum getting married. And yeah, it's just, it's so sad. Got more points of views from other characters, more Athena, quite a lot of Athena in here actually. And we get some Andromeda and Cassiopeia, and that's interesting to see how like all those stories of these sort of side characters intertwine. And that's why like Poseidon was there at this time, and Athena was here at this time, and Hermes was doing this while that was happening, and that's just interesting. And then we get points of views from like snakes and an olive tree and a crow, and those are kind of cool, interesting world building points of view to get. But yeah, I'm really enjoying this. So I've got one part left. I'm just liking the way this is written. I'm really enjoying the mostly like short chapters, and how we do get points of views from mortals, the goddesses, and then like sentient objects and nature and stuff. I'm sort of at the fallout point now of like what is going to happen next after what Perseus has done, and like how a Medusa's sister's going to react. Because I think I mostly know the myth of Medusa and Perseus up to this point, up to Perseus going on his journey and like the culmination of that and what happens to Medusa. So I'm wondering what the fallout is going to be, and what points of view we're going to get now. I do find it interesting that it's called like Stoneblind Medusa's story, which it is, like that's the sort of through line of all the stuff going on, but we only actually get Medusa's point of view every now and then. It's not like completely from her point of view, it's not even majority from her point of view, which is interesting, but I'll give you an update when I've finished. So I'm about to head off to a divine evening with Natalie Haynes at Waterstones, which is exciting. So I'll see if I can get some clips or some photos that I'll like insert here, and I'll like do a little recap maybe of the event, and like if there was anything really interesting that she says. She's going to be talking about A Divine Might, which is her latest book, which has come out in paperback now, which is what she's promoting. So it is a different book that she's going to be talking about, but I'm sure she'll talk about her work in general and like Greek myth in general. And so if there's anything interesting she says that maybe relates to Stoneblind or any of the stories in there, I'll share that and just tell you how the evening went. So yeah, off to that now. So I'm gonna do a little recap of my final thoughts on Stoneblind, and also talk a little bit about the Natalie Haynes event I went to last night, which, spoiler alert, was great. So my final thoughts on Stoneblind. I really enjoyed this. This is really like solid 4-star read for me. I thought it was so interesting that even though this is like Medusa's story, it's not all from her perspective, and we get, you know, other
goddesses and some mortal women and their backstories, their perspectives, that while like surface level don't necessarily seem like they're about Medusa, the way that they all like weave together and like cross over ultimately like gives backstory from Medusa's story, gives more context to what was going on a wider scope at the time with other people, like why Athena feels a certain way about different things, and like how Poseidon is involved with all these like little different bits of Medusa's story when you put it like all together. And I liked that the women in it, or like the female characters, are like very nuanced. Like there are sort of moments in it when you maybe feel a bit bad for Athena, or not necessarily feel bad for her, but like you understand when she's talking about feeling like lost or not having anyone to connect to. Like I did find myself understanding that and almost sympathizing with her, but also I recognize that a lot of what Athena does in this book is awful and she's like not good. But you do see like the good and the bad, and like you see that Hera obviously isn't good in that she like punishes the women that Zeus like often just sexually assaults. But then also Hera herself is like an abused wife. So there's a lot of nuance, very like complex female characters in here. I really liked this one. I thought all the different perspectives were really interesting, getting mortals, goddesses, but then also I think I talked before about how like there's the perspective of a crow and of the snakes, and a tree and all these other things that give wider context or flesh things out. Really interesting. So this, yeah, was one I really enjoyed. Was quite emotional in parts, had me really feeling for like Medusa and her sisters, and also just really enjoyed the way that like this kind of just slags Perseus off. There's, yeah, I don't know if I mentioned it, there's like a whole bit where you get Perseus' backstory of like when he's little through his mother's story, Danae, and you know, he agrees to go and get this Gorgon head to save his mother from marriage. And I was reading it going, oh, he's just trying to save his mum. And then the next chapter is like, are you starting to feel sorry for Perseus? Well, don't, because... And I was like, you got me. But then like further on, everyone thinks of like Perseus as this big hero, and actually it's like, well, no, like Hermes gave him his shoes, and the nymphs gave him like the sword, and he got like Zeus's sword and Hades' cap and all these different things given to him by like gods and goddesses and other creatures, and then he like creeps up on Medusa when she's really vulnerable, and yet he's seen as like generally this big like mythological hero, but this very much takes the perspective of like he just got lucky and he had loads of help from people more powerful than him, and he then just sort of bought into his own hype and was just like killing things using Medusa's head. And so like, is it not like actually the Gorgon head that's doing the killing and not Perseus? And it's, yeah, an interesting take on things, definitely. Definitely want to read more of Natalie Haynes, especially after hearing her talk. So she was mainly talking about the book that is her most recent book, Divine Might, because that's just come out in paperback. And so she was, yeah, talking about that. And it's like the different perspectives of Greek goddesses and female figures in Greek myth. So she started off talking about the Muses, which was really interesting, and how they were challenged over time to several like singing contests, basically, of these people who thought they could take on the Muses, despite the fact that the Muses literally created music. So that was very funny to hear, and she talked about Aphrodite and Artemis, and gave like more context to their stories I hadn't heard before. But it just really, really made me want to read Divine Might, and I want to read like her other books as well. She's so charismatic. She talks about how she used to be a stand-up comedian. That was like what she did. So there was definitely that element. She was very like comfortable on stage, and she was very funny in the stories she told and like the tangents that she ended up going off on. So if you are a Natalie Haynes fan and she's ever like coming to a bookshop near you or doing an event near you, I would like highly recommend going, because she was so entertaining. It was so interesting. She just seems really cool. We didn't have any books to get her to sign, which was a shame, but she did say that she was like running off anyway, because this is my sister's copy of Stone Blind, and is actually already signed. She bought the like signed exclusive edition, so it's already signed, and her copy of Divine Might is currently in a suitcase somewhere, because she's just moved house, and she was like, oh, I briefly tried to find it so I could take it with me to go down, but she didn't want to have to unpack everything just to find one book. But yeah, anyway, that was like a long queue of people getting stuff signed, and she said that she had to go in like 25 minutes, so it was like rushing through everyone anyway. So we were like, no, we won't like buy anything now and try and get in line. But yeah, it was just a really interesting event, and I would definitely like love to see her talk again. If she like has another book out in the future and she does another event like that, I would happily go and see her. She answered a couple of questions as well at the end, and I think like really seemed genuinely interested in other people's takes on what she was saying. So that was nice. But yeah, it just reading this and hearing her talk really makes me want to read more from her, but it also makes me want to read more Greek mythology. She spoke a bit about how in Divine Might there's like a bit about Hera, and how she wanted to look at Hera from a more complex angle, because she said there seems to be a modern take now that it's like, oh, Hera, bitch. But she was like, I wanted to look at it that, you know, she is also an abused woman, like, by Zeus, and she wanted to do almost like a bit of a rehabilitation on Hera, which I thought was very interesting. And I thought also was very interesting in that, in the context of like people writing about Greek myth, Jennifer Saint, who writes Greek mythology retellings, next book is about Hera. So I don't know if there's like now a trend of people looking more intimately at Hera and working her out as a figure. I'm also interested to see if Jennifer Saint talks about that, because in June I'm going to an event with Jennifer Saint and Lucy Holland, like a conversation between them talking about mythology retellings and their works and stuff. So I wonder if she will talk about Hera and her take on things. But yes, I'm very much in a Greek myth mood, very much enjoy Natalie Haynes. I'm hoping if I like read more from her, because this was such a solid like 4-star read, if like her other books that I read are like 4 or 5 stars. Like, she has the potential to be a new favourite author. She just seems really cool as a person, and I really liked the way this was written, so I'm not gonna say that right now because I've only read one of her books. But yeah, she also has like a radio show podcast, I think Stand Up for the Classics or something, which I'm very interested in listening to now. So yes, this was a very successful Feminist Friday. Really enjoyed this one. Highly recommend it if you like Greek mythology and like complex female characters and like maybe slightly different takes on mythology retellings. But yeah, this was great. I had a great time.